When I first began experimenting with Apple spatial audio, listening on Apple Music, one of the things that I found to be a little bit jarring was flipping back and forth between the Apple spatial audio and the actual stereo master. There's a setting in your iPhone where you can basically adjust whether you're listening to the stereo version of the mix or the actual master, or if you're listening to the Apple spatial audio version. Now, to be fair, I think there's a lot of factors that can contribute to this. And in the earlier days of Apple Music, when we were just getting the Apple spatial audio playlists to be populated, I think a lot of the stuff that was happening was catalog work. Now, when you work with catalog stuff, if you've ever done this in the past, you'll note that it is sometimes a very hard thing to do to get your stems that you print to equal an exact representation of the stereo mix. Now, there's a lot of different factors involved in this. A huge one that I can think of right off the bat would be mix bus compression. If you have a mix and compression and it is reacting to the whole entire mix, then it is changing the dynamics, it's changing the relative level adjustments. If things are going under gain reduction and you have makeup gain, you could have sidechain or high passes that are not affecting the low end. So it can be a little bit of a tricky thing to get your stems to equal the stereo mix. Now, one of the things that I said to myself was that if I ever wanted to go down this path, which I did make the decision to do that I really want to try to avoid that if possible. And the easiest way that I could think of to do that is, given that the Atmos folds down, I really wanted to try to come up with a workflow where my stereo mix, my final stereo mix that gets sent off to mastering, is done and derived from the Dolby Atmos mix. At this point, I have about 18 mixes that I've done in Dolby Atmos. That being said, 16 of those will never see the light of day. They will never be released. They will never be heard by anybody but me. The first 16 mixes that I did, I was pulling archives from stereo mixes that I did. I was trying different workflows in terms of freezing tracks, bringing them in, printing stems. I was referencing my stereo fold down, how it sounded against my final mix, how it sounded against the final masters, which were done by other people. So it was a bit of a learning curve. And it's taken me a really, really long time. That being said, at this point, at the time I'm doing this video, which is September of 2024, I do have 2 songs that have been done in Dolby Atmos that I mixed that are actually out and available on Apple Music, and you can experience those. But like I said, it was definitely a learning curve, and there was a lot that I needed to take into account before I felt comfortable actually charging a client to mix in this format and making sure that my room was taken care of and that I was happy with translation and all of the above. So that being said, what I wanted to do is take a look at this particular release. Now, this is a song that was just released on September 5th of 2024. But the cool thing about this was this is the first official song that I mixed in Atmos for an artist. And I believe I mixed this at the end of May or the beginning of June. And basically what happened was this, as I said to the artist, look, I really would like to try this in Atmos, but I want to try something different and I need to make sure that you're okay with it. Instead of doing a stereo mix and then printing stems and then doing an Atmos mix and then basically chasing my tail, trying to make sure that the Atmos actually sounds like the stereo and the stereo sounds like the Atmos, and it's not a completely jarring experience where if you toggle back and forth between the two of them, that it takes you completely out of the moment because they don't sound anything alike. And I thought the easiest way to be able to actually do that is if I generate the stereo from the Atmos. So what are we looking at here? I have a Studio One song open. I have literally dragged in the ADM master file for a mix that I did. And basically what that does is it sets up the whole entire thing. We have your bed over here. And then all I need to do in terms of some basic settings is I need to make sure that I'm routing this and we are monitoring the stereo fold down. Now, in addition to that, there's a couple things we'll take a look at really, really quickly. In terms of my manual trimming, on all of these over here, these are all set to 0. So there is no trimming that's happening. And then I have the 5.1 and 5.1.x down mix. This is set to direct render. In terms of the binaural metadata, this has all been retained from the ADM master file. So nothing has changed. And what we are monitoring is the stereo mix. So what I've also done is I pulled in the actual master. And as the title of this video suggests, the stereo master that was released for Spotify and all platforms was actually derived from the stereo fold down of my 7.1.4 Atmos mix. And the way that I did this was basically just mixing it in Atmos, referencing on headphones, bringing in other stereo mixes that either I had done or my stereo mixes that I used as stereo references when I was mixing exclusively in stereo. And I just got it to a point where it passed the car test, passed all the headphone tests, it felt good in the room, and then basically we got it to sign off at that point. So what I thought we would do in this case is actually toggle back and forth between the actual stereo fold down of the Atmos mix and then the master. Now, I didn't master this myself. This was mastered by somebody else. I believe his name is Alex Gamble. He's a mixing and mastering engineer based out of Toronto. He's worked with a lot of great artists. He did a fantastic job on this master. And the thing that I really like about this is that it's not that different. So let's take a quick listen. We'll start at chorus 1 over here. We're going to start by listening to the stereo fold down of the Atmos mix.
No te equivoques conmigo, que ya no somos ni amigos.
Now I'm going to hop over to the master.
Por mí te puedes cuidar. Cuando pregunten por mí, no digas que nos
Stereo fold down.
conocimos, porque tú no eras real.
Master.
Todo fue superficial.
So the first thing that comes to mind is that obviously I have to pull down the level. I have to trim the stereo master so that we're getting a relative volume match. Now, I haven't done anything where I calculated the whole entire duration and then I calculated the integrated level and then made sure that each one of these was identical. When I do this type of level matching, I more or less try to get a balance of everything and use my ears. So this is a basic level match that I did, and I do this relatively quickly. So let's now hop over to the verse. And what we're doing here is anytime that I do a mix, the goal is always that the mastering engineer has to do as little as possible. Now, in some cases, I've been told by a mastering engineer, sounded great, I put a limiter on it, maybe a little bit of clipping on the peaks, and then I pushed the level till it felt good. In other cases, maybe they might add a little bit of bottom end, or they might just filter things and smooth it out, or give things a little bit of magic with some analog gear. But in either case, I do expect a lot of the time to hear a slight difference, and I'm okay with that. I want the master to be just a refined and polished version of my mix. But if there's anything that's drastically different, then I know I need to go back and fix it in my mix. But again, let's go over to the chorus now. Let's start off with the stereo fold down from the Atmos 7.1.4. Start with the master.
Y ahora es tu culpa que no puedas distinguir cuando alguien es genuino. Yo no sé si es que hay alguien genuino. Parece algo antaño conocer, no enamorarnos. Puro corazón de piedra, sentimientos enjaulados. ¿Para qué insistir? ¿Para qué? Nos quedamos así y nos reímos del que crea que.
Okay, so I do hear some differences. I can hear that there's a little bit more low end in the master. I can obviously hear that there's some things like parallel compression that's happening because I do feel that the RMS, especially on the quieter parts of the song, the RMS is lifted. And even if you just take a look in terms of the peak meters and what's happening, if you take a look at the actual meters when you hop back and forth, you can see that we have more dynamic range in the ADM master, in the Atmos mix. And that is to be expected. Let's go over to the chorus 2 over here and one more A-B. So let's go and start off with the stereo fold down.
No te equivoques conmigo, que ya no somos ni amigos, y ya yo no echo para atrás. Por mí te puedes cuidar. Cuando pregunten por mí, no digas que no conocimos, porque tú no eras real.
I could probably even come up a little bit more on this master. But here's the idea, at least for me. I don't want to necessarily have to do two completely separate mixes and render stems for everything. I think if I was delivering this to somebody else, and that would totally make sense, but I also want to have a workflow where I can do two mixes in one. And I also wanted to try to see, just to test for myself, to see if I could get to the point where the stereo fold down of the Atmos mix sounds like one of my own stereo mixes. And also I can always tell by communicating with the mastering engineer or by getting feedback from the mastering engineer whether I'm way off base. So this was actually the first ever song that I completed in this way. It was the first one where I kind of built up the I guess you could say confidence. And also I had to ask the producer and the artist, hey, leap of faith, I need you to trust me here. I'm going to try something different. Truthfully, I've never done it on a paid gig. And I'll give you my guarantee that if you don't like the stereo mix, that I will redo the stereo mix for free of charge. But in this case, we ended up doing okay. So the stereo mix, the stereo fold down comes from the actual Atmos mix. And that is what gets sent out to mastering. Now, whether the mastering engineer decides, he or she decides that it needs a little bit of width, it needs to be tamed. I can definitely hear that some of the mid-range frequencies are a little smoother. So there's definitely some stuff going on there, and that's okay. And also, truthfully, this stereo master is pushed pretty far in terms of the level, in terms of where it sits, in terms of LUFS. And in Atmos, I'm not putting mix bus compressors on everything, and I'm not gelling the whole entire mix together. So that is something to take into account. And I'm okay with it sounding a little bit different. What I'm not okay with is it being equal to the experience of what I experienced a couple years ago when I was going through some playlists and I was A-Bing things and they felt like completely different songs, completely different mixes. To me, this is probably 90% there.
No te equivoques conmigo, que ya no somos ni amigos, y ya yo no echo para atrás. Por mí te puedes cuidar.
Maybe I could go a little higher.
Cuando pregunten por mí, no digas que no conocimos, porque tú no eras real. Todo fue superficial.
So that is the goal whenever I'm doing any Atmos mixes, and that is the workflow that I'm trying to employ moving forward, because the stereo is still super, super, super important. But I don't want to do two mixes. I want to try to get to a point where I'm mixing the 7.1.4 in this room. I know this room. I know 3 different sets of headphones, and then I can monitor on Apple Spatial Audio with AirPods or something like that. And I get it to a point where it feels good across everything, and it still sounds like one of my stereo mixes that holds up against previous material that I've done, and also it holds up against anything that's currently on the charts that's in a familiar or similar genre. So that is the goal here for me, is the stereo fold down coming from the Atmos mix. And I will tell you that it's not easy to do, but also I can tell you that it's not impossible. Anyways, that's it for me on this video. Have a lot more content planned coming up very, very soon. Hope that you enjoyed this, and I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.